I'm in no way or shape or means a Python expert. I just know how to use Python. But today I'm using Python mostly because the features I wanted to cover are not available in the Android SDK. Some of the things that I mentioned have already been covered by Gabs in the last meetup, and nothing has changed in that SDK since, so there's no point repeating any of it. So I'm going to use Python because that SDK is intended for server-side dev, not so much as client-side dev, and that gives us the power to use some new features on Gemini. Okay. My name is Karthik, and I'm an Android engineer and a GD in Android, not in AI, not in Python. What is generative AI? It's a branch of artificial intelligence that deals with creating content or creating new data rather than just giving you a specific answer about a specific question. It doesn't do just recognizing or classifying. It gives you a holistic answer about something. It's like having an AI that can produce music, it can produce images, text, whatever, all in one, not 3 or 4 different AIs. At its core, Gemini is an LLM. It's a bunch of neural networks. And what LLM is good at is recognizing what the next output would be. So in this case, if you have something like it's raining cats and ... if that's your prompt, LLM understands that maybe the next word would be dogs and gives it a weight, and then based on that weight, it predicts the next output and keeps on going word by word. If you ask a model that is trained on poetry, it'll give you a poetic answer. If you ask a question to a model that is trained on code, it'll give you a code answer. It's really that simple. Modern LLMs that we are using these days, including Gemini and the model behind ChatGPT and so on, they're massively large in data sets. They have diverse data sets, and they pretty much have all the human context they can get which is already available on internet. Now, they have billions and trillions of parameters, and they can capture more complex structures in your prompt as if they were human themselves. You've had classic natural language problems being solved by individual LLMs or individual AIs, and all of that gets combined, and that lets an LLM be so powerful that we can prototype really, really fast. We're going to see this in a few slides later, but you can ask an LLM to explain a joke, and it'll explain it to you as if it was a human. You can even ask it to generate content or simulate some creativity, and it will do that. There are a few differences why large language models are different from traditional AI models. They have emergent capabilities, which really means that it is learning as you ask it questions. It is understanding the context of your question better with each question, especially in the chat interface, because then it understands, okay, I gave that answer previously, and probably that was not what the user intended, so let's go on and create new content which might fit your question better. It also changes how you interact with an AI system, because now you just need to type a question. You don't have to write complex code to be able to use AI to do your work. And then finally, because it's been developed and trained on diverse set of data, it doesn't have to just look for a pattern in that data. It can do a multitude of things. And with Gemini, multimodality is at its core. Why multimodality? Or rather, what is multimodality? With multimodality, you can input a question not just in text, but you can combine text, image, audio, all of this together in one question. And why is that important is all of these together create a context around your question. Simply asking what is the meaning of something versus asking that question along with a couple of images, which might give some more context to that question, will help an LLM answer your question better and in a more efficient manner. And welcome to the Gemini era from Google. We've got 3 levels of Gemini. One is the Pro, which stands in the middle and probably the most common one that you're going to encounter. And that's the one we're going to be using today. We've got Ultra, and it's meant for very, very complex tasks, and I don't believe it's available for public use just yet. And then you have Gemini Nano, which is available through the AI Core model in Android. Gemini in itself, as an offering, is available in 3 different tranches. One is meant for consumers, where you just, you're using Google Search or just Google Sheets as a regular consumer, and you've got a Gemini helper there. This slide deck is about how you use Gemini as a developer, and we will be focusing on something called AI Studio, which exposes us to Gemini API. And then finally, we've got Gemini for businesses, where you've got Gemini accessible through Google Workspace, you've got Gemini access through Google Cloud, and then Google Cloud does another offering of Gemini API called Vertex AI, which is a managed solution where you will have to pay to be able to use that. Okay, moving on. Getting started with the Gemini API itself is pretty simple and pretty straightforward. You do not have to know basic programming to get started. There's aistudio.google.com. It lets you generate API keys. It lets you create and test and save prompts. All of that can get synced up to your Google Drive. You can also customize the base models, tune them on your own data, and just wait for it to get tuned so that you can use it in your application. And then once you're happy with something to start off with, some structure, you can generate code. And if you're not a programmer, if you're probably running a business who wants to identify how to use Gemini better for your business, you can pass that off to your developer in your team, and they can take care of it. This is the interface. This is how it looks. On the left, we've got the get API key, which lets you obviously generate an API key to be used. Over here, you can select the model. At the time of taking the screenshot, Gemini 1 Pro was available, but I believe now 1.5 Pro is also available through here. This is the prompt section. You can see there's some text and 3 images, so that's the multimodality nature of the prompt. And then finally, that button, which is grayed out right now, gets enabled once you start interaction. It lets you generate the code. And the code itself is available in multiple languages. Got Curl, JavaScript, Python, Android, Kotlin, and Swift right over here. But then there are other SDKs as well. All of these languages and frameworks have the official SDK. And then there's a REST API as well in case you're using a language or a framework other than these. Coming back to Vertex AI, I said that this is the managed solution on Google Cloud. And by that, I mean you basically have to run it like any other Google Cloud service, where you have to pay using credits, and those credits cost you money. But there's a positive thing to that, where Google will sort of guarantee that all of your data will not be used to train Gemini any further. Whereas with the AI Studio 1, which is available at no cost at this point, says that you need to pay, your data might be used to train Gemini further. So that's the cost. And the APIs on both Vertex AI and AI Studio have been kept very similar, so that once you're ready with your basic structure on the free version, you can easily migrate to the cloud version. Okay, some of the usage patterns that have been emerging with AI Studio these days. We'll cover things like basic prompting, code generation, search information synthesis and retrieval, function calling, image understanding, and then fine-tuning of the model itself. Let's start with basic prompting. If you ask a simple question, it'll give you an answer back. And if you ask a specific question, it'll give you a specific answer back as well. And you can see it's doing some sort of markdown formatting as well. The issue with this kind of prompt is that if you keep asking the same question again and again, which is generate a short tip on JavaScript, for example, you're going to get the same answer repeated very often. So it's not extremely creative in getting you new answers. However, if you're smart about prompting and use this method called few-shot prompting, where you give it an example and then give it another topic in this case, and just leave it hanging at the tip, Gemini is smart enough to understand that example, understand the context out of it, and then continue from where you left. Oops, sorry. and then understand and continue from where you left. Again, it's called few-shot prompting, where you give the prompt a few examples so that the context of your question is better. And this will give you more creative answers and more unique answers. In Python, this is as easy as writing this much code, where you import the package, create an object for that Gen AI model, ask it a question, and you get a response back. You obviously need an API key to be able to do all of this, and we'll see this when I do the live demo. There's also an interface called chat, where you just create a chat history of sorts. And what it helps us with, it can remember the context of that entire chat history, and your further questions will be based off your previous chat history. So this has state management inbuilt, whereas the previous one, which is called generate content, doesn't have any state management. It's on you to manage that state. Coming towards the end of prompting, if you chain your prompts together and put as much context as possible within your prompt, Gemini will be able to give you a better answer. There are parameters like temperature, safety ratings, things like top K and top something, which I don't understand because I'm not an AI engineer. I'm only an SDK consumer. You can play around with those and see how your results differ. However, if you do not understand them, it's best to not touch them. Okay, coming to code generation. Gemini is great at generating fake data for you. So you can just ask it to generate a list of countries, capitals, and their continents, and it'll throw out something like this. Then you can ask it to generate an SQL query based on this data, and it can do it. So it's generating some code in SQL for you. You can do this for other languages as well, but this example talks about SQL. It can also simulate the execution of this SQL query. Now, it gives you an output, but this is not backed by any SQL engine, and it's purely speculative. It's not guaranteed that the answer would be the same. And then finally, it can be a smart pair programmer. Let's say I'm not great at writing Docker files, or I have no idea about Docker file syntax, but I need one desperately to get started with my server. So I can just ask it to generate a Docker file for me and get started off there, and then now I understand what it's doing. And it can also generate unit tests for you. Consider this simple function, which is part of the prompt itself, and the prompt is write a unit test for this Python function. Let's not judge what the function is doing. Maybe the function is logically wrong, but then Gemini understands the context of the function. It understands the type of input. It understands that this might be true, this might be false, and then it also creates tests for types. So it's a pretty good starting point if you're writing unit tests for your code. Next up is search, information synthesis, and retrieval. And this is where we will start seeing some of the better smartness in Gemini than maybe other LLMs or older LLMs. A common question with LLMs is that how do I bring my own data so that my answers are relevant to my data? As we all know, all LLMs have a cutoff date, a knowledge cutoff date, where the data fed to them on which they're trained is not relevant to your current day. It could be a year before today, it could be a year before yesterday, or whatever. And that means if you ask it a question since that day, you probably won't get a correct or factual response. You'll get something hallucinated. And that's fine, because that's the nature of the AI. It's a generative AI. But then you can give your own data to an LLM. In this case, in particular, to Gemini. Now, there's a context window in every prompt, which means that you're limited to a certain number of tokens in an input. The best way to get started and use that context window efficiently is to put all the instructions in, put all the context in, and all the questions that you can ask based on that instruction and context in just one prompt. You just have to ask. There's nothing that you have to program. But when it comes to Python, you could do something like this, where you can read a document and pass that document on to your generate content function. Now, it's important to understand that this document will be considered as source of truth, and Gemini will respond based on that context itself. What it means is, if the document says deep sea life doesn't exist, it is mostly dead, it'll give you an answer based on that. It will not consider anything else. But if the document itself says the deep sea or gives some fact about deep sea life, the answer will be based on that. It will very rarely consider its own knowledge because now you are providing your information. Again, you have to wisely use the context window because it's limited. On Gemini 1 Pro, it's limited to 30K tokens. But with Gemini 1.5 Pro, it's 1 million tokens. Under training, it was 10 million tokens, but for public usage, it's limited to 1 million. So it can take in much more information and much more context of your question. However, every input is a token, and increased token usage increases the latency of your question. So if you give it a lot of information or too much information, it will slow down the response. So you have to play around and figure out what works best for your solution. Okay, heading to function calling. So far, we've been sending our own data to Gemini, but this time we'll ask Gemini to not use our data. Instead, let us handle our own data, but we'll respond it back. And by that, I mean, there is a function, let's say, which exists in your code repository. It is proprietary in nature, which means you do not want to expose it to public, and that's fine. All you have to do is tell Gemini that this tool is available for you to use. I will execute it on my own environment. You will just get the result back. The SDK will inspect the function. It'll understand the type of inputs it needs and what it does to understand the context. Even a basic documentation of that function works. It doesn't have to go through the entire function. Function calling works in like a handshake manner where you ask a question. If Gemini thinks it needs to execute that function, it'll tell you that, okay, I need to execute that. Do you allow me to execute that? It gets executed on your local environment or your server environment, not on Gemini environment. And then your environment just sends the result back, and then Gemini gives you the output back. Let's consider this really simple multiply function. Obviously, Gemini already knows how to multiply, but if we use this as our tool, Gemini would prefer our tool over its own tool. So we've declared the model name, and we've provided a list of tools available to Gemini on our local environment, and in this case, it's multiply. And then when we start the chat, we declare that we want to enable automatic function calling. In this way, the model won't wait for you to give it explicit permission. It'll just call the function, and that's fine for such a simple use case. The next question is just in plain simple English. Now, Gemini understands that maybe I need to multiply things and thinks of my tool that might be useful. So it calls that and gives this result back. But let's slightly recap and see what happened. We can use the chat history to figure out what exactly is going on within those function calling prompts. Through the chat history, we can get the content and the role of that content, which basically means what was the content and who started that content. So if you use code like this and print it out, it'll give you that user, that is me or the developer using that API, asked a question. The model responded with a function call and asked us to call this tool with these parameters. The user then responds. All of this happens in the background. The user responds with the result for that tool, and then the model gives us a text result back with that answer. Okay, moving on to understanding images by Gemini. Again, very, very powerful in understanding images, and I'm going to ask a few questions. So let's be civil and raise hands because I've got a few things to give out. Yeah, we've got swag there. Okay, guess the movie. Nobody gets surprised because you just blurred the answer out. Next time, please raise the hand. Okay, So the answer is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. If you try this on AI Studio, you might get a response like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory or something like that, but it'll still be in the context of that movie. So it's not completely wrong. Next question. Yes, this movie. That is Home Alone. And this time, the prompt includes explain your reasoning. So Gemini, in its response, goes ahead and explains that I understand what humans call culture, what humans call pop culture. This looks like what happened in the movie because Kevin made that face. There was Christmas tree, there was a home involved, so this might be Home Alone. And it's pretty accurate. Yep, that's what most humans would think. Next one, this is a book. Anyone? No. It's really simple. Huh? No, it's not A Quiet Place. It's a book. Quiet Place
It's
was...
Silent Hill?
No. All right, one last attempt, then I'll move on. Okay. The answer is Secret Garden. Sorry. One more question. Two more questions after this. Actually, one. Sorry. The answer is Secret Garden. Huh? In this example, I do not have the prompt doesn't say explain the reasoning, but secret because shush and garden because it's showing garden. This one. No, it's not Planet of the Apes.
Space Odyssey?
Yeah, it's 2001 Space Odyssey. This was a bit hard because even if you haven't seen this movie, this will be almost impossible to guess because what do monkey, a black square, and a astronaut have in common? If you've seen the movie, you know. End of questions. The next one, it's again about image understanding, but I'm not gonna get it as a question. Now this image has text in it, and has rasterized text and images inside an image. So it's not like we're giving it some non-binary information. And we're asking Gemini to solve the puzzle and explain it step by step. Now, Gemini's image capabilities are so far superior that it understands what it means. It is able to identify text within it in the rasterized image, and then give us an explanation of how did it arrive at the solution for this simple three-variable linear algebra problem. Okay, moving on. Image understandings is useful in adding context or to get some information out of the image itself. Again, images are tokens, so it can be used for instructions, for more context of a question, or to query something in the image. In Python, you would use the Gemini Pro Vision because the regular model doesn't have the capability. If you have an image like this, in Python, you would use it using the Pillow library or Python image library. I've got this simple code to preview it in a window. And then you can pass it along with your text input using a list, where you're asking the question what instrument it is, passing the image binary, which you've just read, and then asking another question, what kinds of music would you use it in? And the response is pretty straightforward. It's a pipe organ, and pipe organ is used in this. So not bad. Another thing to note, which I should have started off with, is that all of these calls are not chunked. It'll give the entire response in one go. There are capabilities to chunkify your response, but I'm not going to cover that. I'm only covering the basics of the SDK and how do you get started. So image understanding can also be used as image conditioning or structured data extraction, where image conditioning is basically a sort of few shot prompting, but using images. And then structured data extraction is for querying the image itself. In this example, if you've played RPG games, you know what characters and things like that are in an RPG game. We just drew a hand sketch and asked Gemini to generate a character statistics sheet for this character. And the output was almost pretty much what I wanted to start off with. For structured data extraction, this was a hand-filled form. Took a picture of it and sent it to Gemini and asked it to generate some data out of it. And by default, it just gave me a JSON. Now, if I were to do some sort of few-shot prompting on this, I could ask it to generate the same thing in maybe YAML or something else for that matter, or even ask it to generate code out of it where I can use this information to work on it. So yeah, pretty powerful stuff that way. And then coming towards the end of the presentation itself, tuning of these models. And what it does is it lets you take your knowledge base, pass it on to Gemini, and let it train on that so that it's more specific to your data. It is possible in AI Studio, where if you connect it to your Google account, you can pass on a Google sheet of data or something like that. And what it essentially needs is a list of inputs and outputs. If this is the input, this is the expected output, and so on and so forth. So it trains on that. That's the interface on AI Studio. You can create a structured prompt right there within a table, or download a sheet or a template to fill your data in and upload it. When you use it with an SDK, now that you're using your sensitive data and passing a large chunk of it willingly, you need to incorporate special OAuth permissions. So you have to create a GCP project, a Google Cloud project, and give it generative AI permissions and do a sign-in to get the credential for it to work. So it's not possible using just the API key. So you've got some added steps, but they're all documented in the link that's over there. Okay, to get started, not every model that is available on the API has the capability to be tuned. So what we do is we first query from the list of models if there is any model which supports create tuned model as a capability. And in this example, we just get the first one we find at the 0th index. So that becomes our base model. And then what I'm going to do is train it on a data which, given an input in given a number input, it gives an output back of +1. So if 1 is given, the output is 2. So I'm going to call it generate num +1 and then some ID because I want to keep it unique. And then the training data is basically a massive JSON array of objects with text input and output, text input and output. You could do multimodality input as well, but I'm limiting it to text input. And you can see I've just put 2 inputs over here, but in the code itself, I've got 20 examples. And all it does is 1, output 2, 3, output 4, and so on and so forth all the way till 20. No text other than that. And then you call the getTunedModel function. You pass the name to it, and then as soon as you do that, you're able to get the state of that tuned model. Now, based on the status and the state of that model, you can actually wait. And maybe if you're building a front end for it, you can ask the user to wait while it's going on, or keep the operation active while the user does something else. And as soon as the model state becomes active, Gemini API lets you know that this model is now ready to be used. You can now get your model from tunedModel/name. You don't have to use model/whatever now, because now it's a tuned model. And then if you ask it a simple question, 55, nothing else, it'll give you 56, because now it knows that if a single number input is given, I have to increment it and give it back. I did not ask it to increment it, just 55, nothing else. Now, another example of showing how powerful Gemini is in understanding context and understanding different languages, if you ask it the same question after training in French, it'll give you a French result back. We did not train it in French language at all. Roman numeral, you get a Roman numeral answer back. You can even ask it in Japanese, and it'll give you the Japanese answer back. And the training was only done in English, 1 to 20, that's it. So it gives correct answers in almost every language it is trained on. And it understands the context that if a single number is given to me, I have to increment it and give it back. All right, that's probably it for the features that I was going to talk about. Responsible AI. This is important. This is really, really important. I'm not an AI developer. I'm not an AI engineer, so I don't understand a lot of things, a lot of settings behind that. But that doesn't mean I can't use AI. And when I use AI, I need to be responsible for it and responsible for the outputs that AI generates for me. And same goes for anyone using AI, especially if you don't understand what's going on within the AI. These are really powerful, and you do get some settings to modify. While Google has published some guidelines, some helpful features, if you do not understand these basic things, it's best to not modify them or modify them with caution, because it can give you really sensitive answers which you might not like, or it could just give you random stupid stuff and you might just say it's giving me stupid content. That's pretty much it. To get started, you can head over to ai.google.dev, sign in with your existing Google account, and then you're presented with the studio. There's also a Discord channel where you can talk to other engineers who've worked on AI Studio or AI itself, and other developers who are using Gemini to develop. And I'm going to open the floor to Q&A because do we have time for live demo? It's 7:30. Okay, I'll do Q&A later. Let me just switch to live demo. Thank you. Okay. I'm gonna skip the basic prompt stuff because that's like really basic. What I'm gonna do is show you the tuning part of it. So that's the code that I used, and yeah, so I've got the training data JSON over here. Oh, okay, this is different. Let me open the other project, sorry. Okay, I've got the API key here. Training data. Yeah, that's the training data. This is a bit different from what I presented. However, this one's got text on it. It's got negative numbers on it. So from minus 98 to minus 97. You can go as big or as small as possible. However, this works even if you just declare 1 to 20. It works fine. And then there are some settings here. Like I said, I do not understand what epoch count, batch size, and learning rate are because I'm not an AI engineer. So these are the defaults suggested by the Code Lab on Google. I'm just going to leave it at that. And then, yeah, it gets trained. And then to use that, it's as simple as calling these functions. I'm not going to be running this right now because I think the Google Cloud project behind this project is not working anymore. So I won't be able to demonstrate, but I'll show you the other parts, and I'm gonna go back to the other project. Now, in this project, the whole context was there's an architect who's running their business, and they've got a bunch of knowledge base in terms of FAQs and the services they offer, and they want to create a chatbot based on Gemini on their website, as an example. It's all fictional. There's no real architect doing that because they're too busy. So what it does is, and yeah, they specialize in sustainable architecture. So all their information is based on sustainable architecture. So factually correct information about their company over here, factually wrong information over here in the two documents called document correct and document wrong. Let me just quickly check if I've got the API key. No, I don't have the API key here. Okay. So what I have over here is I'm reading both documents, correct and wrong. And then I'm asking the same question based on two different documents. How does your company ensure that sustainable building designs align with client objectives? Same question on here, but with a different document. And just to separate the two results, I'm gonna write a line of separation. So what it's going to do is it's going to execute the first one, and because it's a UI blocking, well, there's no UI, it's running on the terminal, but it blocks the thread while it does its network operation and then prints the output. We're going to see some wait before the output comes in, and then we'll see these lines of equal tos, and then the next one. Does anyone know how to increase the size of the run window in JetBrains? The text size? I can try that. Nah. That only works for the editor, not for this window. I've tried a few things, yeah. Maybe if I enter the presentation mode. Oh, God. Oh. That works. It's a bit hard to read now. Anyway, the first result is based on the correct document, which says our company ensures that sustainable building, blah, 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 gives us a bunch of information from their FAQs. And then we've got these equal to lines. And then the result for the second one is the provided document acknowledges that the company prioritizes its environmental agenda over accommodating client needs, which is what the document said. We don't care about client needs. So it's ignored everything else. It knows about, potentially knows about the company, and has given the output based on this document. I'm actually going to exit presentation mode. Yeah, a little better. So that was the information synthesis part of it. Let's see function calling. Yeah, this is interesting. So this particular company has this proprietary function to calculate total energy savings based on energy consumption, baseline energy price, and energy efficient price. So the last parameter over here is basically a discounted rate for being energy efficient, and does something. Now we've got a bunch of documentation here. And an important thing to note for function calling within Python SDK is that you have to declare the type of each parameter in the function. If you don't do that, it complains that I do not know how to work with it. I don't know if it's a limitation or is it by design, but that's something in the Python SDK. Now, let's call it proprietary, very complex. So we don't want to share that information with anyone. But what we're going to do is pass that tool, just the reference of that function, to Gemini. And I'm still using Gemini 1 Pro. I've enabled automatic function calling. And now we've got a problem statement here, which tells us about the amount of energy being used by the building, the rough estimate of price per kilowatt hour. And then there's a discount. We haven't specified the discounted rate. We've only specified the discount. What would be the total energy savings in this case? Now this will print the response, and then it'll also print the chat history like I showed on the slide. Okay, this was happening last time as well. There is some issue going on, and there's a 500 internal server error. Whenever I'm using function calling, it's just giving me 500 server error. It works like 1 out of 20 times for me. I'm not sure why. You can just keep on trying. But when it did work, it showed me the entire history of how it's calling the function, and it figures out the exact discounted rate and passes that as the argument. Probably just give it a few more tries and then give up. Come on. Last try. It's all right. Did not sacrifice enough to demigods. Okay, next up, tuning, energy savings. Okay, code generation. I've got this code here. Sustainability score does something based on some parameters, defines what it does, and also gives us the structure of the function itself. Just to see it in Python, it's over here. And then I'm passing it on as a text in the prompt itself. So Gemini Pro, generate content, write unit tests, and then the function itself. Let's run this and see what it says. So it gave me a Python script, and the script itself imports unit test as a package, which I believe is inbuilt in Python, Python 3 at least. And then it declares, I think, five unit tests where it's testing the correctness of the function. It's testing the incorrectness, or actually value errors in this case, where if I give inputs other than what's intended, because the definition says the values have to be between 0 and 1, providing negative should give you an error, and it's testing that. Even though my function doesn't actually explicitly test any of these, so if I were to pass those values, it would just run and give me an answer. But it's basing it off the description that we wrote, that the value has to be between 0 and 1. So it's expecting it to be a value error, which kind of shows us that it's actually not reading what the function does or the body of the function. It's only reading the documentation. So even in this case, even though you're passing a function to Gemini, your IP is still protected. Let me try if the tune model thing works. So in this case, there was a bunch of FAQ on a website, let's imagine that, specific to the client and their architecture practice. And that's things like this. What services does your company offer? How can your company help me develop a sustainable buildings design? And things like that, 20 odd questions like this. All of this was passed to the tuning code. I'm not going to run the tuning right now because I've got a couple of models tuned already. And then I've got this script which is using that tuned model and asking some questions like, can your company help me design building that generates its own electricity? So pretty vague, but something that would be relevant for an FAQ or a knowledge hub or a chatbot for that matter. Not sure if this will run, but let me try. Seems to be working, otherwise it would have failed by now. Or maybe it is going to fail now. This is just making me anxious now. Come on. Yeah, I don't think it's going to work. Let's ignore it. If it comes, we'll discuss it. Otherwise, it's okay. Yeah, let's be. I've had issues with GCP just yesterday. That's why this is not working. But yeah, all of this actually goes through an OAuth pipeline, but still ends up at Gemini API, not at Vertex AI. Can we go back to my slides, please? Thank you. Okay. 2 of my 5 demos did not work, which means I need to give more sacrifices to the gods. But that's okay. Now I'm open for questions, if you've got any.
Broadly, what are the boundaries of the developer API key? What can you do as an experiment without?
Everything that I've shown right now are the first-party features that are offered on AI Studio. So everything except the tuning can be done with just the API key.
And in terms of API limits, like how often can you?
Gemini API itself has, I believe, they don't publish their rates as such,
Okay.
but because it's a free offering, you can keep on trying, and it's going to be slowish. It's not going to be instant. Vertex AI, on the other hand, can be scaled up and down based on your needs.
Okay.
And you obviously are paying for it.
Thank you.
No problem.
The question I have is that if I show this AI tool an image of a field which has got, say, 5 tomato plants and 5 other plants, can I ask it a question such as, show me which ones are the weeds in my field, and will it actually do it accurately?
Worth giving a shot. I don't know if the base model would do it, but if you were to train your AI model based on that, and it is possible to pass, or maybe it's not possible yet, but on AI Studio itself, you can give it some image input for training and give it an expected output back. Then your tuned model will be able to do it more accurately. And that is the recommended way because the base model is generic in nature, whereas your tuned model will be more trained and more efficient and be more, what's the right word, token aware that this is meant for that. So let's try to use less tokens and give you an efficient answer. Got a question here. And then here.
So you have trained your model with some data using JSON and some TXT. If I have big data, like I have CSV, a long CSV, so will it be able to train with that, or how it will work?
I would have to read the documentation on that, but as far as Gemini is able to understand this is the input and that's the output, it should work. Data format should not matter that much, and the size of the data will also not matter. It'll just take more time if the size is high. With these 20 examples, it takes about 15 minutes to train.
Okay, so
it's
it
that
just uploads the data and give us the result. So nothing need on the processing part on our system.
No, everything is offloaded to cloud. All the processing, it just uploads JSON and does things, and then 15 minutes later, these 20 prompts are ready as base.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Hi, just something about the example I just showed. The first line say import Google.generative AI as Gemini. Are you saying you're able to get data from the public Google AI Gemini or other just AI whatever, or you're using a pre-built private database?
So none of those. I'm not using public data. I'm not using private data. That import statement is only for the SDK, which is used to call functions on the API. So think of the Gemini API as a REST-based, endpoint-based API, and the SDK is just a wrapper on that to make things easier for you. Otherwise, you would have to do all the network management, state management, API key management on your own. But for these select languages, including Python, it's available for you to use right away. So the data actually depends on the model and the trained model itself, not the Python package.
So one step further, I know about Gemini, and I have it on my phone, but I've never heard about it could be run as an API, or it could be just.
Are you talking about the Gemini app on your phone?
Yeah.
So that's Google's offering for you to use Gemini as Google Assistant.
Yeah.
Google Assistant as a product is already based on an LLM. The app uses Gemini's model for Google Assistant's LLM, and that's just for your use. I don't know what data it's trained on, if it's using the same APIs or if it's using the same model or not, but that itself is not available for the API.
Okay, so Gemini is an application AI or it is API? Sorry.
No, that's a very good question. That's a very good question. So before Gemini as the service was called Gemini, it was called Bard, as some of you might know. And the model itself was called Gemini. But somebody in Google decided that it should all be called Gemini. So Gemini is a model, Gemini is an app, and Gemini is a service. They're all called Gemini, and I can totally understand your confusion there. But yeah, that's the case. Gemini app uses Gemini model to present you Gemini content, if that helps.
Generative AI usually has a transform or something inside, and you just need to give it a rule, some parameters like the rule, and it will train itself. Why do we still need the output, and how much it actually helpful, and how it distinguish generative AI or the other AI? How do we know it actually uses generative AI underneath?
Okay. If I understand correctly, you're trying to ask if I'm using the Python package, how do I know it's using that API? Or are you
The
asking
example
AI
you
specific?
showed us is that using the generative AI?
Yeah.
So why do you still need output? Or you just need rules? Because I remember if it's just like AI stuff, like training, you need input and output. That's the old way of AI. But now it's like the big model like generative AI, it use something like a rule parameters to
Okay.
train. Yeah.
I think I understand your question now. It is generative AI, but I'm going with the assumption in this example that it probably does not know very specific information about my architecture firm in this case. So I need to provide that specific information to it. Coming to the old way or the new way, I wouldn't know about it. I'm not an AI engineer. This is what the API exposes to me as a developer, so I'll have to use that. I wouldn't know of any other way. I'm sorry.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Maybe I made myself unclear. So
No, I understand your question. I just don't know the answer to it because I am not an AI engineer.
Yeah.
I'm just a consumer of AI.
okay, thanks.
Yeah. We've got one question there and then over here. After this, yeah.
For Gemini AI, is there a free offering that Google provides? And
Yeah.
if so, are there any limitations on it? Like, can I do code generation? Can I basically do everything that I could do, but it's just like an API limit or whatever?
So everything that I've talked about today is available on AI Studio, which is the free offering. I do not know about the limits on it, probably because they're not published, or if they are published, I haven't seen them. So yeah, that is the free offering, and then you can do all of that over there, and you can take all of that and put it on Vertex AI as well, which is not the free offering, and they work internally. They work the same. It's just two different offering. This one's like more like to prototype and get started. The other one is a managed solution for for enterprises.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
No problem. Question? We'll come to you towards the end. Don't worry.
Hello. Just curious that for Gemini API, so with the function calling feature, so actually, let's say like you name your function multiply, but you in the function you do the subtraction or plus. So is the result is the subtraction of two numbers?
Very, very good question. Let me jump back to that slide, and I'll be able to explain better. I think I'm losing my voice. There you go. Do you see that triple quoted string over there? That's by convention that's used for documentation in Python, and that tells Gemini what the function is doing, not the name of the function. So Gemini reads that. It doesn't infer the context from the name of the function. I could call it subtract, or I could make it subtract things but still call it multiply, and it would understand that even though it's called multiply, this function is subtracting two numbers. It's not even looking at the return statement. It's only looking at the description and the parameters and their types. That's about it. One question here, and then I guess we're going to wrap up over there.
So if I'm correct, based on what you're saying, so extend on that, if that the comment says return A times B, right? And then that the function itself is actually doing subtraction, while the result will still be a multiplication, like it will still be A times B. Is
No.
what you're saying?
The result would then become A minus B, but then it's a developer error because they wrote the function wrong.
Oh, okay.
The documentation says multiplication, but it does subtraction, so Gemini is not liable there. Like, I thought this does multiply.
Yes. So Gemini reads the comment to determine that, or Gemini reads the content of the function?
Not the content. Because the content actually never makes it to the Gemini.
Okay.
It's still there. It's only the documentation and the types.
Okay.
I'm not covering it over here, but maybe we can do a session maybe in the coming months where we go in depth on function calling, the schemas behind it, how Gemini sees it properly. it's not as straightforward as this. There's like a whole schema of it, and then how it wants to see each and individual token in that function. And that'll there it'll become much clearer how Gemini reads a tool.
Cool. Thank
Yeah.
you.
No more questions, but I think Pankaj over here had an answer for that girl's question.
So I'm learning a bit of this space right now, and
Just let her know. He's going to answer your question. Yeah.
So I'm learning a bit of this space right now, and my understanding is transformers are the new fast models. You have something like recurrent neural networks, which are the old slow models, and each of these need training data. And what Karthik showed, the input output is training data for any of these models. So you still need to give it input output to train it.
Thank you so much.
So like after RNN we had BERT. If you know BERT is like bidirectional transformer, but the access for it to having the information is like very limited. Whereas large language models, so as a whole they can have context, inference, and generative things over. So it's kind of mix of a transformer, which gives you the context and the sentence forming capabilities with a generative model. So this together forms a large language models, and that's how like it's kind of different between traditional BERTs, transformers, or RNN.
Thanks, Siddesh. You should be a GD in AI. Let's do that. All right. Thank you both for answering that question. I would have no idea about this because, well, Android is my thing. Anyway, that gets us to the end. Let me just jump to the end because I have an important QR code to show. And then we have the raffle thingy to do as well. Come on. Almost there. One more. Okay. This entire slide deck, as well as the code behind what I just showed, is available on my GitHub through this QR code. This will take you to my website, but you can go to GitHub and everything through here. I've got two different GitHub projects there. One is just the basic demo of what Google wants us to present. And then the second one is a workshop that I developed. And in that workshop is that architecture stuff. So it's got two branches, one which has the starter code where you can get started and start writing code. And the other one is a branch which has everything in there except the API key. Yeah, that's it. Thanks everyone for lovely questions, and thank you both for answering that question that I did not know the answer of.